5,000 years ago, in the heart of the Mesopotamian Empire, a group of farmers decided they had enough with being treated like dirt. They took arms into their own hands and rebelled against the system that kept them down. But they weren't alone. Throughout history, there have been countless peasant uprisings that have shaped our world, from the fall of the Roman Empire to the French Revolution and beyond. So get ready to learn about the hidden forces that shook empires in peasant uprisings. Welcome to my channel. And today let's find out how ordinary farmers changed the course of history. The year is 1326 and the place is England. King Edward III, who had come to power in 1327, had turned out to be a pretty bad king. To fund his lavish lifestyle and endless wars, he had raised taxes, which was deeply unpopular. Peasants were already struggling due to bad harvests, but now they had to give up more of their meager earnings to the crown. This sparked outrage among the peasantry, and soon rumors were spreading about a great tax revolt. In May of 1326, around 1,500 rebels gathered at Lancaster House, led by Wat Tyler, a charismatic leader from Kent. As they marched towards London, more and more people joined their ranks. By the time they reached the capital, their numbers had swelled to over 40,000. Now heavily outnumbered, the king tried to negotiate with them, promising to lower the taxes. But when the talks failed, he ordered his soldiers to attack. Around 1,800 rebels were killed, while Tyler himself was beheaded in Cheapside. Although this rebellion was eventually crushed, it made one thing clear: peasants could fight back and win. Fast forward to the year 1648, to the French village of Le May. It's just an ordinary day until suddenly, a royal tax collector arrives demanding payment of overdue taxes from the villagers. When they plead their poverty, he orders them to be imprisoned until they can pay up. Enraged by the officer's brutality, the villagers rise up and imprison him in the local church. This sparks a wave of peasant revolts across France known as the Fronde. In the midst of the chaos, young King Louis XIV escapes Paris with his mother and a handful of loyalists. The rebels are eventually defeated, and the king returns to Paris as a 5-year-old. While the Fronde failed to overthrow the monarchy, it did leave a lasting impact on the young king, shaping him into the absolute monarch he would become, ruling France for the next 72 years. Our next stop takes us back to China in the year 1850. At this time, China was suffering from a severe opium epidemic caused by British traders smuggling the drug into the country. The Chinese government tried to stop the trade but failed, leading to the First Opium War. The war ended in 1842 with the Treaty of Nanjing, which forced China to pay reparations to Britain. The Qing government raised taxes to pay for the treaty, leading to widespread poverty and discontent among the populace. This created the perfect breeding ground for a rebellion, and soon an estimated 20 million Chinese rose up against their government in the largest peasant revolt in history. Led by Hong Xiuquan, a former schoolteacher who claimed to be the younger brother of Jesus Christ, the rebels established their own government in Nanjing and began fighting the Qing army. For nearly 15 years, the Taipings battled the Qing troops, inflicting heavy casualties on both sides. However, the rebellion eventually collapsed due to internal divisions and the Qing government's superior military strength. By the time it ended, an estimated 20 million people had died, making it one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. While many peasant uprisings have been motivated by economic concerns, some have been sparked by religious fervor. Take, for example, the Boxer Rebellion of 1900 in China. The rebellion was led by a secret society called the Society of Righteous and Harmonious, or the Boxers for short. They believed that Western imperialism and Christianity were corrupting Chinese society, and they wanted to get rid of both. The Boxers launched a full-scale attack on Chinese Christians and Westerners living in China, killing thousands. The Chinese government tried to suppress the rebellion, but failed. Eventually, an international force of 50,000 troops put down the uprising, and the leaders were executed. However, the rebellion had a major impact on China's future. It showed the weakness of the Qing government and contributed to its eventual collapse in 1911. One of the most famous peasant uprisings in history occurred during the Russian Revolution of 1917. The revolution was led by Vladimir Lenin, who promised the Russian people peace, land, and bread. The peasants were particularly drawn to his promise of land reform, which would give them ownership of the large estates owned by the Russian nobility. When the Tsars fell, the peasants seized the land and redistributed it among themselves. This redistribution of land was one of the most significant social changes in Russian history. It ended the centuries-old system of serfdom and created a new class of independent farmers. This in turn helped to create the Soviet Union, the world's first communist state. However, not all peasant uprisings have been so successful. In the early 1930s, a peasant revolt broke out in the Spanish village of El Salvador. The revolt was led by Marcelino Domingo, a charismatic leader who demanded land reform and an end to the traditional system of labor relations in Spain. However, the revolt was brutally suppressed by the Spanish government and Domingo was executed. The uprising may have failed, but it inspired future generations of Spanish peasants to keep fighting for their rights. During World War II, the Nazi regime in Germany implemented a policy of forced collectivization of agriculture. This policy aimed to consolidate small farms into large, more efficient state-run farms. However, the policy was deeply unpopular with the German peasantry, who saw it as an infringement on their traditional way of life. The peasants resisted the Nazis in various ways, including by sabotaging their crops, refusing to sell their produce to the state, and even by joining the resistance. While the peasants were ultimately unable to prevent the Nazis from implementing their policies, their resistance did contribute to the downfall of the regime. Perhaps the most well-known peasant uprising in history is the French Revolution of 1789. The revolution was sparked by a number of factors, including the extravagance of the French monarchy, the growing inequality between the rich and poor, and the influence of Enlightenment ideas. However, the peasants played a key role in the revolution. They made up the majority of the Third Estate, the group that was largely excluded from political power in pre-revolutionary France. When the Third Estate declared itself the National Assembly in 1789, the peasants were represented. The storming of the Bastille, the iconic event that marked the beginning of the French Revolution, was in part a response to the peasants' grievances over high taxes and feudal dues. The peasants also played a key role in the Reign of Terror, the period of extreme violence and political repression that followed the French Revolution. Many of the victims of the Reign of Terror were peasants who were accused of being enemies of the revolution. After centuries of servitude, the Haitian Revolution was a slave revolt that took place on the island of Hispaniola in the late 18th century. It resulted in the establishment of Haiti as an independent state, the first of its kind in the Western Hemisphere, and the second in the world after the United States. The revolution was sparked by a number of factors, including the introduction of the French Revolution ideals to Haiti, which at the time was a colony of France, as well as growing discontent among the enslaved Africans over their brutal treatment. The revolution was led by Toussaint Louverture, a former slave who became one of the most important figures in Haitian history. He led the Haitian army to victory over the French and Spanish colonial forces. After years of fighting, Haiti won its independence in 1804. The revolution was significant because it was the only slave revolt in history that was successful without outside help. It also demonstrated the power of ideas like liberty, equality, and fraternity in inspiring ordinary people to fight for their freedom. Peasant uprisings have played a significant role in shaping the course of history. These revolts have often been sparked by economic concerns such as unfair taxation or land distribution, but they have also been motivated by religious or nationalist sentiments. While some peasant uprisings have been brutally suppressed, others have achieved significant social or political change. The French Revolution, Haitian Revolution, and Russian Revolution are just a few examples of how peasant revolts can shape the course of history. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.